following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha, Khanna, and our focus continues to be on the escalating Israel-Hamas war. Today marks 1 month since the bone-chilling, barbaric and most horrifying terror attacks in Israel's history that killed at least 1,400 Israelis. On the 7th of October, some 3,000 Hamas terrorists launched an unprecedented land, air and sea assault on Israel. What followed next was unthinkable. The terrorists butchered not only soldiers but hundreds of civilians, including the elderly, beheaded babies, brutalized and raped women, paraded them naked and filmed them, posted their videos on the social media, burned some of them alive, tortured entire families before killing them in the most brutal manner imaginable, in their own homes and at a music festival. Some men had their eyes gouged out. Some women had their breasts chopped off. Little children had their legs amputated. This as families were made to watch their loved ones being tortured. And after that dance of death that lasted several hours, the Hamas terrorists took almost 250 people, including foreign nationals, hostage, and they are still being held in Gaza. Holding a national day of mourning, Israelis today held a minute of standing silence to commemorate the victims of the October 7 massacre across southern Israel, with several memorial services being held. The moment of silence was observed without a siren, unlike on Holocaust Remembrance Day and Memorial Day. People sang the Israeli national anthem following this moment of silence. On the completion of 1 month of hostilities between Israel and Hamas, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made a significant statement. In an interview to ABC News in the United States, Netanyahu said, Israel will have the overall security responsibility in Gaza for an indefinite period after the war ends. He also said that while Israel was open to some tactical pauses in fighting here and there to facilitate the entry of aid, there was simply no question of a general ceasefire till the safe return of all the hostages. Remember, just a couple of weeks ago, Israel's defense minister had claimed that his country had no interest in controlling life in the Gaza Strip once the war was over. More than 10,300 people have now been killed in Gaza since Israel launched its military offensive a month ago. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry in Ramallah, almost 4,300 of these victims were children. Israel has been pounding Gaza for a month now with airstrikes and a ground operation. It claims it is targeting Hamas infrastructure and minimizing civilian deaths. As the global chorus for an immediate ceasefire grows louder every day, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned that Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. This as the UN Security Council, during a private session, failed yet again to reach a consensus on a draft resolution aimed at halting the conflict. On Monday, US President Joe Biden and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu discussed the potential for pauses in the Israeli military's operations in Gaza, according to the White House. Meanwhile, President Biden's administration has informed the US Congress that it is planning a $320 million transfer of precision bombs for Israel. The French ambassador to the United Nations reiterated his country's demand for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Paris will host an international humanitarian conference for the civilians of Gaza on Thursday. Significantly, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi spoke to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday and urged India to use all its capabilities to end the Israeli action in Gaza. The United States has condemned as wholly unacceptable comments by junior Israeli minister Eliyahu, who appeared to suggest an openness to the idea of Israel carrying out a nuclear strike on Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu has suspended the minister over these remarks. Meanwhile, on the ground in Gaza, Israel says the Israeli Defense Forces have completely encircled Gaza city. It also says it has exposed a network of Hamas tunnels, command centers and rocket launchers beneath the hospitals in northern Gaza. IDF says Hamas systematically exploits hospitals as part of its war machine. In fact, Israel has released videos of Al-Shifa and two other hospitals showing openings within these hospitals to Hamas tunnels. Tel Aviv has also stated that at least 800 rockets fired by Hamas at Israel fell short and landed inside the Gaza Strip, killing many Palestinians in the course of this war. And even as global outrage over the killings of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza grows, there's also anger in Israel. Families of those Israelis who were either killed or kidnapped by Hamas are planning to protest outside the Knesset in Jerusalem to express anger at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. A WhatsApp group for the families posted, and I quote, "Netanyahu did not attend any funerals or shiva, that's wake held for the dead, nor did he call any of the bereaved families. Tomorrow we are coming to him." That's what the message on the group said.
There will be no ceasefire, general ceasefire in Gaza without the release of our hostages. As far as tactical little pauses, an hour here, an hour there, we've had them before. I suppose we'll check the circumstances in order to enable goods, humanitarian goods to come in, or our hostages, individual hostages to leave. But I don't think there's going to be a general ceasefire. It's not that I think it will hamper the war effort. It'll hamper our effort to get our hostages out, because the only thing that works on these criminals in Hamas is the military pressure that we're exerting. Those who don't want to continue the way of Hamas, it certainly is not, I think Israel will, for an indefinite period, will have the overall security responsibility, because we've seen what happens when we don't have it. When we don't have that security responsibility, what we have is the eruption of Hamas terror on a scale that we couldn't imagine.
I have just completed a briefing during which I approved IDF plans for operational activities in the Gaza Strip. IDF activities over the past day have been extremely impressive. Coordination between air and ground forces is shaking the Gaza Strip. These efforts result in extraordinary achievements, including strikes on terrorists and their commanders in the field. Just over the past day, we have eliminated both company commanders and battalion commanders, some of whom were expected to fill in for commanders we had eliminated 1 or 2 days prior. The IDF machine is working at full capacity. Hamas leader Sinwar is hiding in his bunker and lets his terrorist commanders die in the field. On our side, the commanders stand at the head of the force, pressing forward, achieving objectives and leading the forces. We are proud of our commanders. We are proud of the IDF soldiers. And we are sending them blessings for luck and congratulations.
Regarding the urgent situation in Israel and Palestine, we agreed to cooperate to work towards a humanitarian pause that will ensure the immediate release of hostages, the safety of civilians, a commitment from all sides to act in accordance with international law, a calming of the current situation, and the improvement of humanitarian conditions.
These 8 flights are the first batch. There will be further flights in the coming weeks, and of course we'll continue this as long as necessary. There is emergency, humanitarian emergency in the Gaza Strip. There is shortage of everything, of water, of food, of medicines, medical equipment, of fuel, and we need to use every tool available that we have in order to provide this necessary assistance.
All right. Joining me on Global Lens tonight to dissect how this war is progressing is Major Dan Feferman. He is Israel Defense Forces Executive Director at Sharaka. He joins us live from Israel, and from here in India we're joined by former Indian diplomat Ambassador Suresh K. Goel. Gentlemen, welcome to Global Lens. Major Dan Feferman, let me begin with you. Today is exactly 1 month of the horrific terror attacks on Israel, and it's also 1 month of the Israel-Hamas war and the pounding of Gaza. 1 month on, where do you think this war is headed? How is it currently poised? And how many of its stated objectives has Israel managed to achieve?
Thank you for having me on the show. And to be clear, I'm Major in the reserves. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Israeli government or the military in any way. To clarify one important point, this war has not been going on for a month. It's been going on for a month, less than a day, because we need to remind the audiences that it began with a completely unprovoked, massive terrorist attack on Israeli civilians sitting in their homes, in their beds, in peaceful border communities, not on occupied territory, not on disputed territory, except that Hamas considers all of Israel to be occupied land, and makes it very clear that there's no room for ceasefire, there's no room for negotiations, and there's no room for any kind of a long-term possibility of peace with Hamas and with Israel. Israel's goals then became, due to the severity and the brutality of this attack, and that Hamas, in their own words, by their own spokespeople, are saying they will commit these similar attacks time and time and time again until they can either kill every last one of us or kick us out of our country, which they believe is theirs. So a ceasefire is not something that's possible. A ceasefire was in place until through October 6th. A ceasefire has been in place with every round of fighting. And what happens with these ceasefires that the world is calling for is that they're incredibly short-sighted. The world is pained, rightfully pained, by the sight of civilian losses in Gaza. But by forcing ceasefires, it does two things. It ensures that Hamas and other extremist groups can claim a victory, because all they need, all the insurgent, all the guerrilla, the asymmetric enemy needs to claim a victory is to just be alive at the end of the fighting. And secondly, it allows them to rearm and prepare for the next round of fighting, which they launch whenever they see fit. This time on October 7th, it was on a Shabbat, it was on a Jewish holiday when people were getting ready to go to synagogue. And it was at a time when peace was making major advancements in the region. We are on the verge of a possible Israel-Saudi Arabian peace and normalization agreement. And the Iran-led radical access with Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, who are also involving themselves in this conflict, will continue to derail any opportunities at peace so long as they are still able to operate. And so what became clear after October 7th is that Israel can no longer strike, in a show of force, build some deterrence, neutralize some capabilities, and go back to a tenuous ceasefire. What became clear is that Hamas cannot be allowed to have any military capability, cannot allowed to have the ability to threaten Israel and Israeli civilians again. A country's first and foremost responsibilities for the defense of its citizenry. And so then the question is will the international community finally realize the folly? Will the Israeli decision makers finally realize that we cannot have ceasefires that just erupt into such attacks every 1, 2, 3 years like we've had over the last 17 years since Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2005. Israel left the Gaza Strip unilaterally. And what needs to be done, whether it's by Israel or what should be done, is with the help of the regional moderate countries, with the international community, is a collective effort to dismantle Hamas, to make sure it is no longer in control, in power, in Gaza, in the Palestinian areas, and make sure that the radicals cannot have the ability to derail any kind of positive chances, any kind of potential for peace and for coexistence, which there is in the region. But the radicals must be sidelined, must be neutralized, and must be dismantled.
All right. Major Dan Feferman, before I ask you my next question, there is something I would like to say. You believe the international community is being short-sighted when it's asking for a ceasefire. When 9/11 happened in the United States, the then US President George W. Bush said, you're either with us or against us. But we have to recognize one reality here, that when thousands of innocent people are dying, we cannot reduce such a complex and sensitive issue to such reductionist binaries. It is perfectly possible and legitimate for people around the world, including myself, to be horribly pained by the butchering of the Israelis that happened on the 7th of October, to strongly condemn the Hamas terrorists for their barbarism, and also to be equally pained by the thousands of innocent Palestinians who have been killed in this war thus far. Going by the figures that we have, over 10,000 and counting, more than 4,000 of them were children. And I'll come to you in a moment to talk about the growing pressure on Israel to call a ceasefire, though I know that it's been ruled out by Prime Minister Netanyahu. But I have a different question for you before I go to our Indian guest. Your Prime Minister has said something interesting in his interview to ABC News. He says Israel will have the overall security responsibility in Gaza for an indefinite period after the war ends. Just 2 weeks ago, correct me if I'm wrong, your defense minister had said, we have no interest in controlling life in the Gaza Strip once this war is over. Is there a contradiction here between the statements of the defense minister and the Prime Minister? And what do you think the Prime Minister really means by this statement? Because questions are already being asked about who you're going to hand over Gaza to. Let's say, theoretically speaking, you do manage to finish off Hamas. And what would a quote-unquote complete victory for Israel really look like in this war?
Yeah, those are fantastic questions. First, there is pain and there is suffering on the Gazan side, and we recognize it. I would be very careful quoting Hamas statistics, but it's clear that there are many civilians killed. From the beginning of this war that Israel didn't ask for, Israel has pleaded. It has sent 20,000 phone calls, thousands of messages, spoken on the airwaves in multiple languages, including Arabic, of course, telling Gazans to get out of the zone of fighting. And Israel took 3 weeks before it did that. It opened humanitarian corridors. And what we see is time and again, Hamas is forcing at gunpoint, including shooting Gazans who are trying to escape the fighting area. Today, there is clear footage of many thousands of Gazans who have yet to flee the northern Gaza Strip or are going in the IDF-protected humanitarian corridor into safe zones. Israel absolutely needs to do everything it can, and I believe it is, to ensure that civilians are not being harmed. But any civilians that are harmed, it's important to recognize this is the fault and responsibility of Hamas. Hamas cannot be the governor of Gaza, wantonly and unprovoked attack Israel, and then claim it has no responsibility for the safety and security of Gazans. We actually can have a ceasefire. I think we can have a ceasefire within a day if something changes here, and that is Hamas hands over all of the 240 hostages that it is currently holding, including babies, including elderly people. It immediately surrenders itself. It doesn't have to be to Israel, maybe to some kind of international force, and gets out of Gaza. The fighting will be over tomorrow. Israel has no qualms with the people of Gaza. Israel has no claims over the territory of Gaza. Israel left Gaza in 2005. So the fighting can actually end tomorrow. There can be a ceasefire, but the pressure is being placed on Israel, the party that was attacked out of the blue on October 7th, and not on Hamas, the party that started the fighting and then is hiding under hospitals and behind civilians in order to try to maximize their casualties for its own PR purposes. I don't see a distinction between the quote from Defense Minister Gallant and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Israel really has no interest in maintaining control over the Gaza Strip, over the life of the Gazans. Again, Israel left unilaterally, every last settlement, every last soldier in the Gaza Strip in 2005 in an effort to spur peace, in an effort to make it very clear to the Palestinians and to the world, Israel has no claims over Gaza. Israel wants to live side by side alongside the Palestinians in Gaza, and we hope that we can have a peaceful future with them one day. It cannot be, it's very, very clear, and we were fooled and misled by Hamas. It cannot be as long as Hamas is around. What I believe the Prime Minister's words were that while we don't have any intention or interest in ruling the Gaza Strip, we might not have an option, at least as having the final say over the security, the short to midterm stability. The hope is that a much more moderate, a revamped Palestinian leadership with the backing of the international community and maybe Arab powers can take over, because Israel really has no interest in remaining in Gaza. And again, for the fourth time in this interview, and I can't say this enough to the international community, Israel left Gaza in 2005 for this purpose, but Gaza refuses to leave Israel alone.
All right. Let me now go across to Ambassador Suresh Goel. Ambassador Goel, you've heard our Israeli guest. The question I want to ask you is this. Even though Prime Minister Netanyahu has rebuffed all calls for a ceasefire, fact of the matter is there is growing international pressure on Israel. And if you look at what's been going on behind the scenes, it's clear that there is pressure even from its close ally, the United States. Just yesterday, President Biden spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu to discuss the possibilities of humanitarian pauses in this fighting. This is an official statement released by the White House. So my first question to you is, how much longer do you think Israel can really, in a sense, continue to ignore this growing global chorus for a ceasefire? Because whether anyone likes to admit it or not, innocent people are dying in Gaza every single day. And two, has Israel set itself an unrealistic target? They say they want to finish off Hamas and this war will end only with a complete victory for Israel. What would that even look like? Can there be any such thing as a complete victory in a war such as this?
Good evening, Neha. First of all, to begin with, like you, I begin with mourning for the children and the grown-up and the civilian population, Israelis, first of all, who died in the attack. Barbaric is the word you used, and I completely agree with it. Who died in the barbaric attack by Hamas on October 7. Israel and India have been good friends. We have been working together on many things. I have been to Gaza, I have been to Palestine several times. I have studied the situation, both in terms of history and in terms of the UN resolutions. Therefore, I am particularly pained because the hopes, optimism generated by the Oslo Accords for peace in the region are now being totally belied. Okay, having said that, the question really now comes to whether it is possible and for a ceasefire at all. I doubt it very much, because I do see practically on a daily basis calls, obviously very well-intentioned calls from countries all over the world, including the European Union, USA, and everyone, to basically have a ceasefire or a pause in fighting to deliver the humanitarian assistance. The reason being given for ceasefire is to be able to deliver the humanitarian assistance.
Yeah.
UN keeps on trying for the humanitarian support and everything, but there are trucks going through the Rafah border, but whether it is being delivered, how it is being delivered, nobody knows. And second thing is, there are contradictions even in the call from the USA. On one day they say that yes, there has to be a pause. On the other day, Anthony Blinken says, no, if Israel were to actually do the ceasefire, there is a danger of Hamas grouping. I don't know about that part really. I'm not certain, because they are under great deal of pressure, but maybe. Therefore, I do not see any intention either on the USA side to enforce ceasefire from Israel, or to persuade Israel enough for a ceasefire or any intention from Israel to have a ceasefire. Therefore, I'm very skeptical about that, number one. Number two, by the way, on this side, I am of the view that if Israel wants to control activities of Hamas, they can do so. Was it yesterday or day before, when they actually sent the dog squad into the tunnels to get the Hamas out? I think that was very effective way of doing it, really. Number one. As far as, sorry, your second question was, Neha, please do remind me.
Whether there can be any such thing as a complete victory for Israel, because by their own admission, they have been at the receiving end of this terrorism since the conception of the country. Are they going to be able to finish it over the next few weeks or months?
I doubt very much that if they were to go by the objectives they have announced to win the war, that is complete vanquishing of the Hamas, that is unlikely to happen. As I said earlier, again, Hamas is a kind of an organization which is going to be very, very difficult to completely eradicate. You kill one, there will be people who actually go to the other countries. They're all over in the different countries, and they will regroup and they will start again doing it. And why do we forget that Hamas was actually encouraged, if not created, by Israel to take on PLO and the PNA?
Yes.
Because Hamas became...
That's an accusation that's leveled repeatedly against Netanyahu, that he actually covertly supported Hamas to create a divide within the Palestinians.
Absolutely. Therefore, I don't think that in the long term, Israel may completely give up on Hamas. They may find it useful again to be able to keep a control over the Palestinian politics. But to be able to achieve even the war ends are very, very unlikely. But when Israel says that they will keep security of Gaza under control, then clearly Gaza will be more like an occupied territory.
Well, if you ask the Palestinians, it's already been an occupied territory. It is described as the largest open-air prison in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Therefore, I think once Israel has been able to create its own security umbrella over Gaza, and they can be reasonably sure that they are able to control the activities of Hamas, they may call an end to the war. But then it will be like a penal colony, or it will be like open-air prison, or like a colony of Israel, so to say.
And that is at the heart of this conflict that has been going on for years and years, because the Palestinians look at it as occupation and colonialism. Okay, let me go back. Let me go back to our Israeli guest at this moment. Major Dan Feferman, I have two questions for you. Number one, it is my job as a journalist to play the devil's advocate. Yes, what happened in Israel on the 7th of October was barbaric, to say the least. There can be no remote justification for it. However, the accusation that is now being increasingly leveled against Israel 1 month into this war is this, that you have chosen to respond to atrocities with atrocities. If you believe that the attack on the 7th of October was a genocidal one, well then today you stand accused of carrying out a genocide of Palestinians. If what happened on the 7th of October in Israel constituted war crimes, then so do Israeli actions in Gaza today. How would you respond to that? I'll come to my second question later.
It constantly shocks me that people look at the result and not the cause of what happens in war. War is a cruel thing. War is a vicious thing in which people get hurt. But we must, as an international community, as people with a moral fiber and clarity, be able to differentiate between those who respond to the murder of civilians versus those who instigate it unprovoked. We also have to look at the word genocide. It's not just about if a lot of people are killed or not. It's about what is the intention. Hamas's intention, as said by their own spokespeople and by those terrorists who were captured alive and interrogated on camera and released for the world to see, their intention was to murder and brutalize civilians. And if Israeli elite forces and just some armed citizens and police officers wouldn't have done what they did in the most heroic way, they would have kept on murdering. They had enough arms and people and food and drugs, by the way, to keep them going for many, many more days. And the intention was to murder as many people as possible. Israel is responding. It is a democratic country. It respects human rights. It respects international law, unlike Hamas, and it is responding to this unwarranted and unprovoked attack on its citizens. It has pleaded, it has warned, it has given time for civilians to get out of the way. And Israel's faced with a tough choice. And for every person who accuses Israel of genocide, they're either being completely insincere, they're being completely misinformed, or they refuse to answer the very simple question, what would your country do? Hamas's strategy is incredibly simple. It provokes attacks on Israeli civilians and then hides behind its own civilians. Israel cannot just say, okay, because you're hiding behind civilians, we can't respond. It's trying its best again to use intelligence to target Hamas. It's called for, and most of the civilians have gotten out of the way. And Israel is the one opening up humanitarian corridors. Israel is the one that's allowing international aid to get in. Hamas is the one trying to steal international aid. There have been instances already where Hamas have broken into where the food and where the fuel is, and they've stolen this international aid for their own purposes. It clearly has enough fuel to continue firing rockets every day. And so I don't think the issue of fuel is a shortage. There is a disconnect here. Hamas is a genocidal organization that calls for and acts towards the murder of Israel's civilians. This is not what Israel is doing. The fact that civilians are very unfortunately caught in the crossfire, and due to Hamas using them as human shields, is morally very different than what Hamas did. And we must be able to recognize it with all the pain, that brings when innocent Gazans really are caught in the crossfire due to Hamas's actions. Hamas likes to, I'm hearing rockets now overhead in my city, and I'm 40, 50 kilometers north of the Gaza Strip. Hamas uses the media, uses international law very selectively and when it wants. While Israel, as a transparent democratic country, makes its best effort to try to respect it. It is such an incredibly difficult situation, but I ask you in return and the listener, what choice does Israel have? After the events of October 7th, Israel can no longer allow this threat to fester on its border, and it must be dealt with all the pain and cost. Yes, every effort should be taken to spare Gazan civilians. International pressure must be placed on Hamas to allow these civilians to get out of the way, which is what even today and throughout Israel has been allowing humanitarian corridors to allow aid to get through. But just the fact that intelligence has been released, again, for the world to see, that Hamas's main headquarters is under Gaza's hospital. And this was purposeful. This is how Hamas operates. Given this a choice between very bad and even worse, I'm really not sure what is expected of Israel. And I would ask any country in the world, what would you do in such a scenario? Just let Hamas continue to exist? It's a rhetorical question, because I think everybody would answer and act in the same way that Israel is doing, or much worse.
Okay. Mr. Feferman, I hope you're safe where you are. You talked about rockets being fired. I know you have to leave, but can I get one more question in before we let you go? Would that be okay?
Sure. One last question, and I have to get on another interview.
Absolutely. I understand that. My question to you is this, that, it looks like it could be a long drawn out war. What do you think a winter war is likely to be like for Israel? Because historically, winter wars have proven to be extremely challenging, if not disastrous, for invading armies. And also, what do you make of the growing anger against Netanyahu and his government at home? Because apparently protests are being planned by the families of the bereaved outside the Knesset, many of whom have accused the Prime Minister of not attending any of the funerals, not speaking to any of the bereaved families, not to mention the huge failure that he's accused of, which led to these attacks in the first place.
As to your first question, fortunately, and unrelated to this war, winters are not very severe here in Israel. They're quite mild. They're usually bits of rain here and there. I don't see that being an issue. Israel is very painfully, both at the risk to its own soldiers, who are our friends, our neighbors, our brothers, our sons, and to the risk to Gazan civilians, is going to do everything it can in as safe a manner as it can to neutralize this threat of Hamas. And whether that's in bad weather or good weather, they will do what they can. This isn't Northern Europe. This isn't Napoleon going into Russian winters, or Hitler going into Russian winters. This is quite mild weather here. As to your second question, there is a lot of anger at Netanyahu and at this government. People will have to take responsibility, but that'll have to happen the day after the war, and the Israeli society cannot deal or be distracted by this now. So long as this war is going on, we must stay unified as a country. We are currently unified as a country, and afterwards we have a democracy, we have elections, we have transparency and oversight, and those appointed and elected officials who had anything to do with this really intelligence failure that we paid for very dearly on October 7th will have to answer to the public the day after this is over.
All right. On that note, Major Dan Feferman, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Global Lens and sharing your perspective with us on this ongoing conflict. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Let me now go back to Ambassador Goel. Ambassador Goel, since we had to let our Israeli guest go, I needed to give him a little more time earlier on the show. But coming back to, the changing narrative, there is no doubt that in the first few days of the October 7 massacre that happened in Israel, I think it would be safe to say that the larger sympathy and support of the world lay with Israel. But once the bombings began, many wondered how long it would really take for the narrative to shift, for the sympathies to shift, and for the victim to be perceived as the aggressor or oppressor. I think it would be safe to say that 1 month into the war, that has happened. That is a perception that has got built. Do you believe that Israel will remain impervious to it completely?
Neha, it doesn't matter whether Netanyahu, I will not say Israel, because frankly speaking, what is happening here is that Netanyahu, as a prime minister, who became rather casual about the security issues, and who, with the IDF not being able to detect that such a thing is being planned, with all the best intelligence system that it has, it is Netanyahu who is trying to redeem his honor. It is Netanyahu who is actually trying to basically prove himself once again as the Prime Minister of Israel. Therefore, let us not talk about Israel in this case. I'll talk about Netanyahu and IDF. Now, the point here really is that yes, over a month, the sympathy of the world, including the Europeans, as attested by the demonstrations in those countries, has begun to shift over to the Palestinians. But whether this sympathy of the larger possible majority with the Palestinians, whether this would be enough to really resolve the issue, doubtful. Eventually, Israel is determined to have its way in Gaza, and with the support of the countries in the West, who will actually look the other way, despite their own civilian populations looking askance at this. Israel will basically go ahead. And eventually, I do think, painfully so, that existence of Gaza as we have known so far, even as a colony of Israel, with all kinds of restrictions and everything, is in doubt now. I know that Hamas is there, but Hamas will regroup. Hamas will be anywhere at all. In any case, I have no sympathies for Hamas. It's a creation of Israel. But Palestinians, they are going to be the end losers. They will suffer. It will be actually a culmination of the projects which started in 1947 of the landization of the Palestinians. And I think pretty soon we'll come to a stage when there will be no Palestine. Painful, very, very painful.
Well, you are saying that we are very much looking at a situation that can be described as a genocide and ethnic cleansing of an entire people. And that is exactly what the Palestinians and their supporters have been talking about.
Absolutely. Except that the world still hesitates in using those terms as far as the Palestinians are concerned. They may say it in private, but there is no UN resolution at all so far condemning the genocide of Palestinians.
They cannot seem to agree on the draft of the resolution. Forget about taking any real action. They've made 4 attempts and failed. They can't agree on the draft of the resolution.
Absolutely. Neha, there is a saying in Hindi, कि गरीब की बीवी सबकी भाभी होती है. So I think basically what we are seeing is that Palestinians, as the forgotten lot by the world, are practically coming to the end of that ether.
That does sound terrifying and very, very painful, and none of us want to see this. And you know, this is a conversation that I've had with a lot of my Israeli guests on this show in the last 1 month. You know, some of them, the moment you say that your heart is bleeding for these Palestinians, especially the women and children who are being brutally killed, they label you as Hamas apologists. And my point simply is, you know, why can't we equally condemn the terror actions of Hamas and at the same time the killings of innocent Palestinians? Why are the two mutually exclusive? And how does calling for an end to this war amount to being a Hamas sympathizer?
Absolutely. Just one word in terms of history. Before 1947, Jews and Muslims have coexisted in this area. The problem actually began when the UK created a separate state for Israel, evicting Palestinians from their homes, giving all kinds of things, regions, biblical homes and all those things. Only if you can find a solution where, once again, there can be two states side by side within their autonomous boundaries, I think half the problem would be over.
On that note, can I tell you something interesting? I have recently interviewed 2 former prime ministers of Israel, Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak. And both of them conceded that Netanyahu is a very unpopular man in Israel today. That if an election were to be held today, he would lose fair and square. Ehud Olmert went to the extent of saying, I do not like this man, I do not trust this man, he has failed miserably as the Prime Minister. And both Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak seem to think that this far-right government led by Netanyahu is going to collapse under the weight of its contradictions. Soon there will be a more moderate government in place, and then you can actually have hope of establishing some sort of peace with Palestinians, because they keep hoping that Hamas will be out of the picture and maybe the Palestinian Authority will sort of take charge. Now, is that a real possibility, or is that, you know, utopia that they're talking about?
Neha, the problem that Hamas, and again I'm saying it out of my own experience in the area, Hamas got established, or Hamas came into existence for two reasons. First of all, most of the Palestinians were unhappy with the way PNA, led by Mahmoud Abbas, was operating. And I know that there was a lot of corruption. I do not know if that corruption exists even till now or not. But there was a lot of corruption in that area, and they were very unhappy with the way PNA was actually handling the situation there. And therefore, Hamas came up in Gaza, and Hamas managed to again divide that, all right, PNA will go to West Bank and Hamas will take charge of Gaza after the elections over there. And this situation was exploited by Israel. And then later on, with the other countries coming into play, it has become increasingly complex. And therefore, I don't think it will be as simple as what we can say that if Hamas can be controlled, PNA, etc. It's a mess at the moment, really. And the only way it can, I think, can be handled is that if there is an assurance that there can be a secure Palestinian state boundaries, and there can be an election for a fresh election in that area under international supervision for a Palestinian government. I think that's the only way that we can think of a good government in Palestine. Yes.
So let me ask you another hypothetical question as we wrap up this discussion. I think we can both agree that, you know, we need more moderate elements in power on both sides, which unfortunately has not been the case leading up to this war. Ehud Barak also told me, and he's a former Prime Minister, he says, I have always believed in the two-state solution. We must never lose sight of it. I know that Netanyahu and his far-right government do not believe in it, but that is the only way forward. These guys are not going to last for very long. So let me ask you this question. Is there a real possibility that you do have, you know, Hamas, if not being finished, at least being severely debilitated in this war by the Israeli forces, Netanyahu, you know, going out of office, a more moderate prime minister coming in Israel, and perhaps being open to the idea of a two-state solution going forward? Or again, am I just being too romantic and too optimistic here?
There are two, and Neha, I wish you were too romantic and but the problem is there are too many ifs and there are too many perhapses here. It's very, very difficult to predict in the way, forecast in the way, whether if Hamas is debilitated, there is a moderate government in Israel. We don't know. We really don't know if they will happen at the same time or not. We can be optimistic. We can be all romantic. But at least from my own perspective, I don't really see that happening very soon.
All right. You understand the situation better than most of us, sir, having served as a diplomat for India. Clearly, this is a very complex situation, but I think one thing we can all agree on is that we all want to see an end to this war at the earliest. What happened on the 7th of October in Israel was a massacre, and what's happening in Gaza today is no less of a massacre. We can choose any word we like, whether you want to call it a genocide, whether you want to call it a massacre. Fact of the matter is, too many innocent people are dying in this war, and we all hope that this madness ends sooner rather than later. On that note, Ambassador Suresh Goyal, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you.
All right, with that, it is a wrap on this edition of Global Lens. If you have been, thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow. Good night.